parents replaced me with my cousin after I refused to take over the family business. Now they want me back, as it crumbles. Growing up in the Thompson family meant one thing. Legacy was everything. It didn't matter what I wanted. It only mattered what my parents wanted for me. They owned Thompson & Sons Furniture, a business my grandfather built with his own hands. It was my father's pride and joy, the empire he always expected me to inherit. But that was the problem. It was his dream, not mine. For as long as I can remember, my parents molded me to fit into the role of the next Thompson to take over the business. While other kids were outside playing or pursuing their hobbies, I was expected to learn the ropes of running a furniture company. Inventory, payroll, understanding supply chains, all the things that made me want to gouge my eyes out with boredom. But I had my own dreams. From the time I was a teenager, architecture fascinated me. I wanted to design, to create furniture. It was small, contained, and felt like a prison. I wanted to build skyscrapers, bridges, things that would change the skyline, not just fill rooms. By the time I turned 25, I had put off the inevitable for as long as possible. My parents had always been patient, assuming that, eventually, I'd see the light and come around. But that day never came. When my father sat me down one evening, I knew what was coming. "Ryan," he began, with that tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable but was really demanding something. "Your mother and I think it's time you start preparing to take over the business. You've had your time to figure things out. Now it's time to step up." I didn't even hesitate. I'd been rehearsing this conversation for years. "Dad, I'm not taking over the business. I'm going into architecture. I've been offered an internship at a design firm, and that's what I'm going to do." Silence. My father's face hardened, the disappointment spreading across it like a storm cloud. My mother, sitting quietly beside him, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "This business is your legacy, Ryan," my father said, his voice rising, trying to keep control. "It's not some hobby you can just walk away from. I didn't build this company just to hand it off to some stranger. This is your future." "No," I shot back, tired of pretending to care. "It's your future. It's always been your dream, Dad, not mine. I've never wanted this. I want to be an architect, not a businessman running a furniture shop." My mother finally spoke, her voice soft but filled with that guilt-laden tone she had mastered over the years. "Ryan, we've done everything for you. This is the family's business. You're a part of that whether you like it or not. You can't just walk away." I stood up, feeling the anger rise in my chest. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'm done with this." My father, never one to be challenged, exploded. "You're being selfish. You think the world revolves around you and your dreams? Well, it doesn't. You've had it easy your whole life because of this business. It's time you start giving back instead of chasing some fantasy. I'm not sacrificing my entire life because you decided what I'm supposed to do." I shouted. "I don't owe you the rest of my future just because you've put pressure on me for years." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into a life I never wanted. Ethan's arrival. After that argument, I distanced myself from the family. I knew they were furious with me, but I didn't care. I had my own path to follow, and nothing they said would change my mind. About 2 months later, I heard through a cousin that my parents had brought in Ethan, my cousin, to take over the business. Ethan. Of all people, they chose him. He was a nice enough guy, but he had been drifting for years, bouncing from one dead-end job to another, never really knowing what he wanted to do. My parents saw him as their backup plan, someone they could mold after I had abandoned them. At first, I thought I'd feel some resentment, but I didn't. In fact, I was relieved. If Ethan was their golden child now, maybe they'd stop breathing down my neck. They could have their heir, and I could finally move on with my life. For the next few years, I focused on my career. I finished my architecture degree, landed an internship, and quickly climbed the ranks at a top firm in the city. My work was my passion, and I didn't look back. My parents? They stopped calling, and I didn't call them either. It was a cold, mutual distance, and while it hurt sometimes, I figured it was better than the alternative. Act 1, entitlement begins. But of course, things didn't stay peaceful. When Ethan took over, I thought my parents would leave me alone. I was wrong. It started subtly at first, passive-aggressive remarks from my mother during the rare family dinners I still attended. "We're so proud of Ethan," she'd say, casting a sideways glance at me. "He's really stepped up for the family. It's a shame some people aren't more involved." I ignored the digs, knowing they were meant to get under my skin. But soon it escalated. They started spreading rumors among the extended family, painting me as the ungrateful son who had turned his back on the family. I would hear about it through cousins or old family friends who would ask, "Why did you abandon the family business, Ryan?" One night, after hearing enough of the gossip, I finally confronted my mother. I called her up, my anger boiling over. "Why are you telling people I abandoned the family?" I demanded. "Do you really think that's fair after everything I've done for myself? Just because I didn't want to take over the business doesn't mean I've abandoned you." "I'm not spreading rumors, Ryan," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. "I'm just telling the truth. You did walk away, didn't you? It's not like we're making this up." I cut her off, furious. "I didn't walk away from you. I walked away from your expectations. I didn't sign up for a life in a business I hate, and you have no right to make me the villain here." She tried to change the subject, but I hung up. Enough was enough. Act 2. The money grab. Things got worse when I noticed unusual activity in one of my old joint accounts. I had almost forgotten I still had an account connected to my parents, something they'd set up when I was younger. But now, money was being funneled out. I checked the transactions, and there it was, payments made directly to the furniture business. I confronted my father immediately. "You're taking money from my account to fund the business?" Without asking, he didn't even flinch. "It's not like you're struggling, Ryan. You're making good money now. And that business? It's yours, too. You're a Thompson. This is part of your legacy." "Part of my legacy? Are you serious right now? That doesn't mean you can steal from me. We didn't steal anything. We borrowed it. You should be helping out anyway." "It's your responsibility," he shot back. "I wasn't having any of it. I froze the account that day and shut it down entirely. They weren't going to guilt me into paying for their mistakes." Act 3. The ultimatum. Years passed. I had little contact with my parents, and I thought they'd finally let it go. But then, everything came crashing down. One night, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was shaky, and I could hear the desperation. "Ryan, can you come home? We need to talk," she said. It didn't sound like a request. It sounded like an emergency. When I arrived, the tension in the air was thick. My father sat at the dining room table, staring down at his hands. My mother paced, clearly nervous. "What's going on?" I asked, not really caring what the answer was. I had a feeling I already knew. "It's the business," my father said quietly. "It's failing. Ethan, he's not doing well with it. He made some bad decisions, expanded too fast. The company is drowning." I stayed quiet. There was no point in rubbing salt in the wound, but a small part of me wanted to. After all, they'd thrown me aside when I didn't play their game, and now they were asking for my help. My father finally looked at me. "We need you to come back, Ryan. You're smart, you're business-minded, you can turn this around." I shook my head. "I told you years ago that I wasn't interested in the business, and I haven't changed my mind. You made your decision. You handed it to Ethan." "We didn't think it would get this bad," my mother said, her voice breaking. "Please, Ryan, we're going to lose everything." I sighed. My patience